So Shabbat Shalom, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. I am really honored that you have taken time from your Shabbat to be with me, and I don't take lightly that your time is valuable. So this course was originally conceived as the greatest hits of Judaism. And to put it another way, I thought I'd give you the highlights of my $150,000 investment in Jewish knowledge. That is my choice to forego paid work and be a full-time rabbinic student. What I learned from our experience last week is that diving into Jewish wisdom is soul nourishing for anyone, but academic jargon is only interesting to a few people. So I am going to share my screen. And let me go to a set of questions to begin our formal discussion on our topic, which is the Hebrew Bible. And maybe what does it mean to read the Bible with a Jewish lens? The focus of when so our agenda for today is our group discussion to settle into how we see the Bible. And then an overview of who wrote the Bible. I took that question last week very seriously, although I won't be giving a description of the breadth of the Bible, mostly just the Torah. And then reflecting on our original discussion in light of the information, which is primarily gleaned from the very accessible book, Who Wrote the Bible by Richard Elliott Freeman. And so what place does the Hebrew Bible have in your life? And do Holy Scriptures, which we might think of that term as being the way that Christian Bibles are titled when we're able to go to hotels, but it is actually also the way that we have described the Hebrew Bible, Kitvei Kodesh in Hebrew, have a primary place in your Jewish practice. And do you have a different relationship with each of the sections of the Bible? The sections from a Jewish perspective, the divisions are the Torah, which are the 5 books of Moses, the prophets, and then the writings. So if anyone wants to, I would love to know more about where people are coming to as we get into all of this information. Please jump in, Jan.
Really, only the first division is the one I've really studied. I mean, I've seen bits and pieces of the others, but only really focused on the first.
I think for me, it's almost like the Bible, or mostly the 5 books of Moses, right? The Torah has almost been Disney-fied for me. I mean, the stories and the little sayings and the 10 Commandments, but every time I pick it up and really read it, it is like the first adult novel ever written. And, you know, it is not Disney-fied. It is really harsh and sexy and terrible. And I think we kind of do a disservice to make it so, you know, so, how shall I say it, cleansed. We cleansed it, you know, really to teach it. So that was kind of a revelation to me. And I've always thought I'd really like to spend more time just reading it to see what it's really about. Because I know the stories, but I know that's not exactly how they were written.
Right. Yes, Jan.
So when I was on a tour of Israel with the Federation, we went to this place in Jerusalem, and the tour guide said, "This is the place where King David was standing, and he looked down and saw Bathsheba, is that her name? Whatever her name was. Okay, in the bathtub, and he fell in love with her, and he got her pregnant, and so he sent her husband off to war to get killed." And I'm like, I don't want to be descended from that guy. Forget it. I mean, I didn't know that till I went to Israel.
Because you never listened to the story of the Hallelujah song.
Well, but they don't say it that way.
Yeah, they do.
Rooftop, looked at her, went down and made her pregnant. Come on.
listen to the Hallelujah song.
I do, but it's different when you get it described like that.
That's my point.
Yeah, I've always, you know, I went to Hebrew school, I went to religious school, I went to Hebrew school, I went to Hebrew High, I've gone to, you know, like Slichot services and, you know, gone to Shabbat services all my life. So, but it seems to me that I have studied the Torah, the Bible, in like postage stamps scattered, or maybe like a jigsaw puzzle with all the pieces scattered, but the connecting piece is kind of missing. So I learned the story of Moses, I learned the story of Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and the, you know, and like in Hebrew school, we would take like a sentence and we would dissect it and look at the word, but never really get the whole context. And I really feel like the thing I'm missing is sort of a through understanding of the Bible, the Torah, as a book with a beginning, a middle, and an end. You know, it just seems like even through the course of the year, you read this parsha this week and that part, you know, maybe because I don't come Saturday morning often enough, but you know, you don't hear the whole story, but you get this little piece or that little piece, or you just get a line, or, you know, just a little phrase from a section. So I just feel like I have all these scattered little bits, and I'm kind of having a hard time putting it all together.
I totally understand that.
Yes, I agree. I have little bits and I'm sorry I'm late, by the way. But I get little bits and pieces. And I love it when, especially when you Rabbi or Cantor start sewing and weaving. So thank you.
So I echo everything that everyone said. That was my relationship with the Bible before starting rabbinical school. It actually, having not read the entire Bible, I felt that I wasn't worthy of attending rabbinic school. And I had to get over that idea in order to just apply. But it is very interesting, the way that we focus solely on the 5 books of Moses, and then the scattering knowledge of prophets is because the early rabbis made a decision to select passages to be a point of reinterpretation of the section of the Bible that it goes with. So you weren't ever getting even the full picture of that prophetic book. You were just getting how the rabbis related it to the focus of the story of the Torah. And there is no, don't be worried that it's not, even if you read it from beginning to end, it's not one book. So it's not, it's not intended to be a coherent through line all the way through, though you can get an understanding of how it was seamed together. Okay, so I will, so we're going to start with the
question.
Sure.
The Torah versus Bible. I'm so used to hearing us talk about Torah, and Bible always seems like not a Jewish term. Can you
comment? The word itself means books. So it is totally, well, I guess it's sort of the question of like, are you more comfortable referring to Jewish texts in English or in Hebrew? And so we have, we tend to use Hebrew, but also to make it more relevant or more approachable. You know, you might choose to use the word Bible, but it's not less Jewish to say that. The only, and I say this with kindness, the only less Jewish way of referring to it is Old Testament. And that is because, so when I describe the difference between how we see our Bible and how Christians see it, it's not because I'm trying to, chas v'shalom, I do not mean to disparage Christians, especially the ones that we know and love. I just want to intellectually distinguish between our understandings of the books. So referring to it as old indicates that it has been superseded by what is new. And that is what is being said when you refer to it as Old Testament, to distinguish it from the better known Christian Bible. People will usually say either Jewish Bible or Hebrew Bible, even though it's not all in Hebrew. It's mostly in Hebrew. And then Tanakh is the other name that you might hear for it. And that is a Hebrew acronym for Torah, Nevi'im, which is the Hebrew word for prophets, and Ketuvim, the Hebrew word for writings. So those are generally the ways that we would describe it. Now, the other confusing thing about the word Torah is that it means the one who, it means wisdom. So you can talk about someone's Torah, you can talk about the breadth of Jewish wisdom as being Torah, or you can use it as shorthand for the written Torah, which would be a way of another way of describing the Hebrew Bible, and the oral Torah being the Talmud, which is now also written down. Yeah, Nancy.
Yeah. So the Torah / 5 books of Moses is the same writings as the Christian Old Testament, correct? Don't they have the Genesis and Exodus and
Right.
all that? So, but what, so then dumbly she asks, why is it called the 5 books of Moses?
Because from our earliest understanding of it, we claimed that it was all written by Moses.
Okay.
So it is a way of distinguishing those books in our Bible from the other books. And while the section, our Bible is included in Christian Bibles, they're included in a different order. So the 5 books are in the same order, but part of what we know as prophets is divided in a historical section rather than in a prophetic section. And there are multiple ways that the Catholic Bible has a different order from the Protestant Bible. I don't have the schemas in my presentation to show you, but that so it's that different ordering, and that different ordering is about making a decision to bring all of the books, all of the writings to a climax with the birth of Jesus, and to show that they are all announcing that he is the Messiah. So it is a very like rhetorically rich decision.
Right.
So it's also very interesting to know that we actually have 2 versions of history telling the same historical stories, and one is in the prophets and the other is in writings.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah, of course.
Gosh, I learned so much from you.
Okay, so to periscope in a little bit farther, so let me go back and give you this overview of the documentary hypothesis. So the 5 books of Moses were put together for political reasons, and the story of they are the story of the history of the Israelites. And this story, in the way that it is written, cements the story to confirm their common identity and shared future. So the most important thing to know is that at the time, histories were not written for historical accuracy. So the concepts of myth and fact were just not known in the Iron or the Bronze Age. And those are the ages of humanity in which particularly the 5 books of Moses occur in. And remembering how long ago that is the reason that I in my mind, like hook it onto those ideas, which, you know, in the way that popular culture has given me a sense of human history seems very, very long ago. And so the Bible helped unite the people and strengthen them into a minority culture that has been capable of surviving 2,000 years of exile. This is by far one of the most unique aspects of Jewish history, just the fact that we survived. So, and that by having our texts to bind us together, and our along with our practice and our identity as a one people, has really been a source of inspiration for other peoples who in the modern age have been dispersed from their homelands. So moving forward. So the documentary hypothesis posits that there are 4 sections to the 4 different types of works that were brought together into the 5 books of Moses, and that there was a redactor, which means a person who wove them all together. And so I'm going to tell you about these sections in the order that is generally seen as the order in which they were written and brought into our civilization. So the first one to be written is named E. These were all named by a German biblical researcher. So some of them will go from the German understanding of how to pronounce things, but E is also in English how we begin the understanding of how to pronounce the Hebrew name of God, Elohim. It is a pious thing to not write out the name of God when not writing spiritual texts, which is why you'll see many people write Elohim instead of Elohim. Okay, so this writer has a sympathy and affection for Moses, and he never mentions the Abrahamic covenant. What that means is that he's never talking about the fact that God chose Abraham and the descendants of Abraham as his special people. The divine is only referred to as Elohim until Moses arrives. And that's when you get this great burning bush situation where you get multiple names for God, including the 4-letter name. And then it's probably composed in the kingdom of Israel, which stood from 922 to 722 BCE. So last time we met, we had a probably too dense explanation of the history of our people, but that kingdom was the larger kingdom and the more worldly place. And so the person who wrote Elohim was probably a Shiloh priest and probably a descendant of Moses. So J refers to the ineffable name of God. If you pick up the book Who Wrote the Bible, which I highly recommend, can't see it when I hold it up to the screen, but it is of all of the books that I've read for rabbinical school, the easiest one to read. It is purposely written like a whodunit to keep you going and to make you intrigued by the end of one chapter in order to read the next chapter. I found out that my sister, that Richard Elliott Friedman is a professor who used to work at UC San Diego, and he was her professor when she was in undergraduate. And when we were studying this, one of the questions that we were asked when we wrote a final paper about it was like, how does this relate to your relationship with Judaism? And it all made sense. Much more of my conversations with my own sister made sense to me because she was learning this from the man who wrote it. And so her perception of Judaism became much more cynical. Okay, so I hope that I am able to wrap this in an understanding that is less cynical than a college classroom. So J is the ineffable name of God, which Yud He Vav He, which we cover over by saying Adonai. It is not the way to pronounce those letters. But if you read the book, the reason I was bringing up the book is that scholarly works will use will translate it into English. So if you are, if it's uncomfortable for you for religious reasons, to just know that ahead of time. So in the J sections, it's God is always called by this name, and it emphasizes the significance of God's covenant with the patriarchs. So the stories of Esau are only in J, and Esau is known as the person who begat the kingdom of Edom. So that kingdom is near the kingdom of Judea. So it's south of other places. So I hope I did answer the question that yes, the Bible is the Old Testament, and that Christianity has the New Testament. And apologies for not describing BCE again. It is this. It refers to the same period of time as BC. The phrase BC refers to before Christ. BCE means before the Common Era, and so it is a less Christian-centric way of referring to time. It is used more commonly in the breadth of academic scholarship to try to reorient, to recognize that both time and human history should be understood beyond the scope of a Christian lens. So J was probably written in the kingdom of Judea, and it does refer to the dispersion of the tribes of Simeon and Levi, but not the other tribes. So because of that, it is posited that it was written before the Assyrian dispersal of Israel in 722 BCE. So this was a really key point in our history. One of those childlike stories that we tell of ourselves, that the 10 tribes of Israel were lost. They weren't lost when the Assyrians dispersed us, but their leadership was taken away into the Assyrian Empire. And the people, the vast majority of people themselves never left. Some of them had somewhat different forms of practicing their religion, but claiming that they were all dispersed is actually an elitist form of understanding our history. Yes, please, Nancy.
Sorry. Well, there's two things. Was there not 12 tribes?
Right. So the other two, absolutely. The other two tribes were understood as still living in the kingdom of Judea.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is I'm not sure if I'm understanding J. Like, is that just, I'm not.
So J, the letter J refers to the Hebrew letter Yud. So when the Hebrew letter Yud is translated into German, it becomes a J sound. Like they have just sounds instead of yod sounds.
Like Yud.
Yeah.
So, Jew.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, exactly.
So, but that's all that is, right?
So J itself is referring not just to the kingdom of Judea, but particularly to this name of God, which is spelled Yud He Vav He, and that we pronounce as Adonai when we are chanting Torah or reading Torah. It is the name, which in Hebrew the name is Hashem, and people will tell you that we don't know how to pronounce it because that is one of our ongoing stories that we tell ourselves as Jews. Part of why we say that is because we think that there is so much power in this name and that it calls towards the essence of God so completely that our Bible tells us that only the high priest could pronounce the name of God on Yom Kippur in the Holy of Holies.
Okay. Thank you.
But from a reform and academic perspective, I can tell you that the way that this name is pronounced in the Richard Elliott Freeman book and by most scholars, for your understanding of what J refers to only, is Yahweh.
Yahweh, okay.
This is also where Jehovah's Witnesses get their name. That is how they understood the pronunciation of this word.
Oh. Okay, that makes sense.
Okay. So moving forward, the next section that came to be is the priestly code, which is probably people's least liked sections of the Bible when we get to reading it in our annual reading cycle. So the priestly code is theorized. Now, I tried to use a pop culture term, retconned onto the wilderness story. What does that mean? When you retcon something when you are telling a very long television story, it means you pretend that this thing happened originally in this way, even though when you originally told the story, it didn't happen. Or to put it another way, when we talk about the tabernacle, we're telling a story that the people who wrote the book wrote. It's not something that actually occurred. Because if it sounds to you like in our weekly portions, we jumped around, we totally did. We were in the wilderness and we had just gotten to the wilderness. We might have had some manna, but that was about it. And now we're talking about a huge, gorgeous tabernacle that we're building to connect with the divine. And what our Bible scholars tell us is that this is a story told for a purpose. And so the temple is never mentioned in the priestly code. Now, the German scholar Wellhausen thought that Ezekiel wrote this book. He had a whole bunch of ideas about this. He thought that it was created by an author after the exile to reestablish the priesthood in Jerusalem and a symbol of the Second Temple, and therefore Ezekiel wrote it. Friedman explains that all of that is part of the Christian scholarship focus of why they created the documentary hypothesis to begin with. So this pulling apart of the sources of our Bible was done in part to show that that the source was not God giving it all in one piece to Moses, and therefore the Jewish covenant was not the most magical, the most important connection between God and humans. So what Jewish scholarship has done is make it more about what the text can tell us about the history of our people, and less about proving a theological point. We are very good at distinguishing between our historical knowledge and our theological knowledge. Totally understandable. So according to Friedman, centralization is assumed, and it was written after the fall of Israel and probably before the fall of Judah. So there was this time period when some of the priests and whatnot moved from Israel to Judah. And so there were two different groups of people that had the priesthood. Some saw themselves as descendants of Aaron, and others saw themselves as descendants of Moses. So this Aaronid priest was probably from Jerusalem and created it. He knew the J and E text in a combined form. So that means that someone had already weaved together the J and E text, and he wrote the priestly code as an alternative to that combined J and E text. In the priestly code, God is only mentioned as just and not as merciful. So, sorry, I can't hear you. You're muted, Arlene.
I am totally lost. I don't know what priestly code is. I'm not understanding the thread. And like I said in my thing, I never went to Sunday school. I only had a couple of years of Hebrew school, and I'm totally lost. I'm not understanding the thread of what is relation to what. Like, I don't know what priestly code means. I don't know what JE. I'm not understanding any of this. So it's going right over my head, and I'm frustrated.
I'm really sorry. That
So-
is totally on me. And
Well, no, it could be on me. I just want to let you know that I'm lost.
no, I really appreciate you telling me now. I'm not sure how much I'm going to be able to make this class better, but every time I am reminded that I am going to a high level, it helps me to refine my ability to create a meaningful adult education
No,
situation.
when you say it's the book of Moses, and you say Moses wrote it, and now I you know, like I said,
Right.
I don't have as much of a religious school background as maybe a lot of other people. So, I mean, I just had a few years of Hebrew school.
I agree, Arlene, because I have not had any Hebrew school or religious school. Other than going to
Reb
temple,
Minster,
I don't know either. So it's nothing
Myself
personal.
too.
I just haven't had that education either.
Yeah.
Right.
Reb, would reading Friedman's book help us solidify our background on this?
Oh, 100%. It took me, so what I did with Friedman's book is, let me stop telling you about the difference between these different sections, and tell you the story of me reading Friedman's book. I had never heard any of this. I didn't even know that there were 4 strands of anything. And Friedman's book is written like a detective novel, and written in such a way that it is actually hard to parse out this stuff. I underlined my copy of the book, and then I was asked to write a paper about it. And I was in my 30s, and I had never written a formal academic paper since graduating college. So I was terrified. And so I was terrified of writing in paragraph form. So I went back and I took all the things that I had underlined in the book, and I wrote it down into a note. And then because I had that note in my notes folder, I was able to go back to that and pull, and from those notes, pick out this clearer, outline form of the 4 strands. But the brilliance of the book is not in that lecture. It is in reminding you of stories, and actually providing the text of the stories, and showing you by bolding part of the text which part is from different. So like the flood story, the priestly text is in boldface, and the J text is in regular type. And so that when you're looking at the story of the flood, which feels like a very central, we all know Noah, right? We sing the songs of Noah and the flood. It's so weird to like be able to distinguish between the different strands by looking at it in a book. And I think that that's also part of my problem, is that I understand things a lot more when I read them in a book than when someone tries to tell me about it. Because I'm a visual learner. I think that's why I go to PowerPoint slides. So it's on the level of J and E.
Reb Minster, it's,
Yeah.
I hate to say it this way, but I almost need Torah for dummies. I
Can I
mean,
just ask you-
yeah,
I agree. I'm with you. I try and process it.
yeah, I'm trying to
hard.
understand, if you just say like, who is J and who is E? I mean, if you can simplify it for me, I mean, maybe I don't want to stop the class because maybe I know less than most people, but it's it's almost too complicated for me, and I need to know, like, who is Jay? Who is he? What is this? You know?
Okay, let me say something. Okay, it starts out with everybody says it's the 5 books of Moses written by Moses. But then the historians and these people with looked at these things individually. They looked at the whole 5 books of Moses, and they found these 4 strains, these 4 things based on when it was written, what the language was, who, what things were in it, and they came to this theory that there are these 4 separate sections written at different times, written by different people, and based on how they say how they call God. One is Elohim, one is Yahweh, one is, different names of God, different way God is projected. Sometimes he's merciful, sometimes he's just. What was covered in these sections, they have 4 separate sections, and they're just giving them names like E for Elohim. That's just because God is called Elohim, and J because in that section he's called Yahweh, right?
Yes.
And then there's the priestly code, so that's P, and they talk about different things in different ways.
What is the priestly code?
I mean, it's about how to be a priest.
Right.
So there are different sections of the Bible that like go into very deep detail about how to be a priest.
That's Leviticus, right? The laws. Oh no, and how they should wear and what they should do and how they should do sacrifices. That's the part that everybody thinks is boring, but is fascinating, really. So that's the priestly code. And you know how they have the priestly blessing and what the priest should do, and then I don't know what the next one is, but so that's what it is. There's just these 4 separate strains that make up the 5 books of Moses.
Right.
It's not. Yeah, and the book probably goes into much more interesting detail.
Yes.
But it's like history detective.
I'm just afraid the book's going to be too intellectual for me. I mean, I need it, seriously, I need it Torah for dummies. I need this explained to me because we didn't have a lot of Torah studies in Temple Beth David.
Well, sometimes you just have to let it wash over you and not try to figure it out. Just listen and see.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Next time you'll learn more of it. That's when I go to all the sisterhood events and I go to the Torah study. That's why I know these things a little more. So that's
okay. Thank you.
Yeah. A lot of things that you learn in life, you heard long division, in 3rd grade, and it didn't make sense. And then you learned it again in 5th grade. And then all of a sudden one day in
college,
graduate school, suddenly, oh, that's what they've been telling me all these years. And, this is not a simple straight line kind of a, just follow the crumbs to the end of the story. It comes to you in lots of different ways, and you just have to really absorb what you hear, and it doesn't all make sense. And that's kind of what I was talking about, like the jigsaw puzzle. It's all these pieces, but today Reb Minster will add another piece to our puzzle, and maybe it'll connect something, but we're not going to be done at the end of this hour.
No.
But just you gather the pieces and kind of meditate on it and attend other classes and read other books. And like I posted the YouTube link for last week's, because at one point I was processing what she had said, and I stopped paying attention, and then all of a sudden she was on another topic, and I'm like, wait, what happened? How do we get there? That's just the way my brain works. And I went back and watched it again. I go, oh, okay, now part A and part B are put together, and hopefully this one will be on YouTube too. I'll probably watch again too.
But it's very good for your brain, Arlene.
Yeah, but there's lots of stuff.
Oh, I hope so. I mean, I'm just uncomfortable if I never want to get too far ahead when I'm lost.
No,
so that's why I said something.
Yeah. Okay. Go on, Reb Minster. Thank you.
Is it helpful for people to see the slides, or do you want me to just talk to you about the next section?
Slides.
Slides,
The visual
slides.
learners in the room like the slides.
Right.
Okay.
I'm gonna
I know
have
it
to
can
leave
also
soon.
be overwhelming okay, so we did go through P. So the fourth section is D, and it is Deuteronomy, which means the second telling. It was claimed to be discovered during the time of King Hezekiah. There's actually a section in the Bible talking about it. And as a feminist, it is one of the most exciting parts of the Bible because they went to a female to confirm its holiness. And it's the only time that they go to a woman in the Bible to confirm that something is holy. So, and then it shares the same language as the book of Jeremiah. And so this author wrote both the book of Deuteronomy and the early books of prophets. So collectively, they have this convoluted name that is very hard to say, Deuteronomistic history. So that includes Judges, Joshua, Samuel 1 and 2. And this history is retold in Chronicles by a different author. So their writing is shaped by four themes: fidelity to Hashem, Davidic covenant, which means that our continuation as a people will go through David, and the centralization of religion at the temple in Jerusalem, along with the Torah. So the redactor is the fourth bit in this, perhaps the most important because we can name the person. We are pretty sure that the redactor of our Bible, the 5 books of Moses, is Ezra. And he lived in the Second Temple era. He was a priest of the Aaron descendants. He retained the original as much as possible without intolerable contradictions, but there are side-by-side stories that enhance one another. When we start, if you open the Bible to the first 3 chapters, you will see 2 entirely different stories about the origins of the universe. They are from different sources, and they are there so that we are all part of one people. And they show how that those 2 can really be seen as completely separate sources, just by pausing between your reading of the 2 and realizing that the way that we remember it through is one source. Yes, Shari.
So this kind of puts to rest the idea that the entire 5 books of Moses were dictated by God on Sinai.
Yes.
Okay.
As Reformed Jews, I can confidently confirm to you that didn't happen, and that's okay.
Okay.
For me, the more than the details that I am sharing with you today, the fact that we had a combination of politics and spirituality, of the need for power and the need to unite, those struggles start with the people who wrote the Bible. And they have continued with us throughout our history. And to me, that is a much more beautiful human wrestling, both with community and with the divine, than pretending that a very, very long book was written on a mountain by one man. So the redactor creates this flow of history. So this is a bit more complexity, but there are a lot of names of people in the Bible, and it's just like one person begat another person begat another person. It makes no sense. It stops the story. It feels like it stops the story of the Jews in order to tell you a weird history. But what scholars think is that this was a separate book called the Book of Generations. And it was used as a way to seal together all these different sources. The priestly author also wrote a plague narrative, and that was used to connect it all. And then there were known stops on the 40 years in the wilderness, which are used as place markers as stories are interspersed. Like the story that we're reading now about the tabernacle is interspersed in that other well-known flow.
Could I ask a question? So Ezra's called the redactor, but wouldn't it be more like an editor? Because when you think of a redactor, I think of taking things away. You know, when you say a redacted copy, things are crossed out. So were things crossed out, or were things edited together? Or, I mean, is there a reason it's called redactor?
I think that exactly as you're saying, we don't have the complete books as they were originally written. There were changes, there were redactions made, not that we can see where they were crossed out, but we can see where one story isn't complete. The Genesis stories are completely contained within themselves, whereas most of the other stories are chopped up. You might be able to read a whole J story by taking out the E additions to it, but we don't think that we have the breadth of what was written before this redaction.
So he did take things out.
Yeah. Okay. But he was trying to not remove, he was trying to remove as little as possible.
How did they know what to remove? Was it just his judgment?
Yeah. Exactly.
So,
his judgment.
So basically a lot of changes were made with people who weren't there.
Yes. Most of what was written, all of what was written, so the one thing that I learned in Hebrew school that is probably still correct is that we had oral stories of how we became people before anything was written. So nothing was probably put down. That was probably not the first way that we transmitted our knowledge. Nothing was probably written by the people who experienced it. And particularly with the Exodus from Egypt, that probably didn't occur as it's written in the Bible. And so the way that we chose to tell these stories was as a unifying force. One theory that I've heard is that there were 3 different tribes from one who traced their lineage back to Abraham, another traced their lineage back to Isaac, and a third to Jacob. And in order to tie together those 3 groups of people, a story was told that connected all 3 of them. So it's a little bit disorienting to think that everything could have actually happened differently than how we know it in the Bible. So a bit of additional information is that what's most important is not really maybe who wrote the Bible, but also who reads it. And in particular, is this information about there being 4 different major strands plus a redactor useful to your own Judaism? Perhaps we've always had an understanding of the complexity of the books that we're looking at, because Judaism has always had this notion that there are 70 faces of Torah, meaning that there are 70 equally valid interpretations of every single verse of the Torah. So in the rabbinic imagination, meaning how the rabbis created the Judaism roughly that we know, is that the 5 books of Moses were most important. So we have always, as a people, understood the 5 books of Moses as having come together first, and then the prophets, the closed, and then the writings were the final books to be sealed into our Bible. So that's part of why they made that most important. They also, declared that you must believe that the 5 books of Moses were given to Moses on Mount Sinai, and they do a transmission from Moses through on to the early rabbis. In the Reform imagination, one of the major changes that occurred through the Reform movement is centralizing the prophetic voice and really emphasizing how the prophets spoke to us about making a just world and a world that has space for all people. And so part of the reason that Temple Beth David doesn't have a history of Torah study is that is a very high Reform understanding of like that the way that other Jews read the Bible, read the Torah on an annual basis is not central to how we engage with Judaism. Some information for you about the other books of the Bible is that the Psalter, which is the book of Psalms, can really be seen as the original Siddur. And what I mean by that is that these Psalms were brought together in this way, we think because they were used as part of the way that people came to the temples and the way that people, what the Levite singers would sing during temple ritual. It's also how the earliest people who practiced some form of Judaism, religious rites outside of the temple, would pray with. So the wisdom literature is in the books of writings, and that's the Proverbs, Job, Lamentations. This is advice on how to live a meaningful life. And we have a lot more examples of wisdom literature throughout Jewish history, but this is another central idea to what you can get out of reading the Bible. One of the things, Shari, if you have another question, happy to stop.
No, just left it up. Sorry. My arm was falling asleep. Thank you.
And then the other thing to think about is something that we started our conversation with, which is the difference between choosing to follow the annual cycle of reading Torah versus reading the entire Bible. I actually wrote a final sermon of sorts for one of my classes that challenged us that perhaps it's not useful that we are continuously reading the 5 books of Moses, and rather having a book club where we specifically go through the whole book would be more meaningful for connecting us with the Bible. And people in Israel have actually codified this and made a website to gather people from around the world to read the whole book from beginning to end. And they just started a new cycle last Sunday. And they provide more information. They have a larger website in Hebrew, but they have a lot of information in English about the breadth of the Bible, to really be able to dig into each of the different books, and with a community of people. And there are some synagogues even here in the United States that follow along with that cycle of reading. It's actually not required to read the whole Bible to finish rabbinical school. So our next class will be on February 26th, and it will be giving a little bit of information, hopefully, about how this all was codified into the Talmud and early rabbinic Judaism. So I did want to consider the question of, like, is this helpful at all? Like, knowing that there are different people, different groups of people with different political reasons for why they wrote the different books of the Bible. Yeah.
I find it helpful, even though, like Arlene, I'm not necessarily understanding everything. But what it does is I write down information, and I go and I look for books because I'm a reader. And like, I'm gonna look into that, who wrote the Bible, and maybe I can have a better understanding, but at least it starts with that. And then when I read something like that, I always read with a notebook to write down questions. So this is very helpful for me, I feel.
Yeah. I would be interested in understanding how the Torah, especially with all the sex and violence and everything like that, how it helps make my life more meaningful. What's the connection? I'm not really sure I understand that connection.
It's because we didn't invent it. We didn't invent all those horrible things. They've been going on forever. And it
Right.
tells you about forgiveness, and it tells you about second chances, and it tells you about punishment, and it tells you about the consequences of your behavior. I mean, it's a living, breathing document. And as Reformed Jews, we have to keep making it relevant to today. That's how it's important. That's why we're all sitting here in 2022.
Right. See, this is what I want to learn. I want to, like, this story teaches us X, and this story teaches us Y. This is how I process. You know, I really want to understand that.
It's pretty X-rated, right?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean,
Am I right? It's Reb Minster, isn't that true?
Yeah,
When
I
you
mean,
look at
I think about the fact that the book that I am looking forward to reading when I'm done with my thesis is Judith Plaskow's Standing Again at Sinai. Because for me, and having this political background and knowing that people were human and not just pious ones, right? It really helps me to feel better about the fact that I'm not following the same religion as what, you know, people say. Especially on the internet, people get really mean about the differences between Judaism and say that you're not a real Jew, right? And so I am very much more a Reformed Jew than any other type of Jew. And I don't find halakha to be the central guiding star of my Judaism. And I'm not sure that the Bible is it either. But it is our holy work. And for me, the way that I place it in, even though it's written by Benjamin for a male perspective on the world from a particular point of time, I don't have to discount it. I can pull out wisdom from it while also, but I also, in many times, have to set aside my my feminist humanness.
Biases, right?
Yeah.
Cantor, Cantor. I mean, I think what we're missing, because, you know, like this book is not in the library. I think what we've never had is clergy or other people recommend books for the library. And I would very much like a list to see if we can get congregants to donate a book or something like that. Like people have donated to other aspects of the temple. I think we need to do that. And I wouldn't know, you know, I'm sure, you know, I mean, I would appreciate you sitting down with the librarian and saying, you know, and Jerry, maybe you can help us. What are we missing? What books do we not have that people might find interesting?
But I don't know that we would be interested in this book without this class, you know, just to drop something in the stacks. I think you need to have some kind of context for the community to even be aware of it.
Well, right. But I'm saying,
I'll buy this book and have a little book club on it.
But I think the library should have, you know,
There's probably a million books in there that nobody's even picked up that has to do with this kind of stuff. We've got the Woman's Commentary. We've had it for years. I'm sure nobody's even read it. So yeah, I mean, it's good. And there's a lot of stuff on the internet too that explains these things. But I think the fun part is the study of it. And we've never, ever in my time had like a Torah study, which you're doing, Reb Minster, which we never had before.
And it would be interesting to do a study.
The juicy parts.
Well, not only that, I mean, no
But
offense.
Robin, what you're saying is that we can put together a group to do this and include a reading list to at least touch base with before we
Right,
begin talking about
right.
it.
Oh,
Maybe we can
Jerry,
incorporate it.
Jerry, are you actually talking about programming? Oh, thank you.
Maybe we
The
can
heart-
incorporate,
My hat is off to you.
maybe we can incorporate it with Jan's Monday discussions. You know, she picks these really nice books on stuff. So, I mean, or another day or something, but I like the idea of like some sort of a reading
No.
club.
I think what we're looking at and seeing the gap is that most of us don't have very much of an educational background in this area.
In the
So
Torah,
it would be, so whatever it is, so it would be helpful to read some of it before we begin to talk about it.
Right, right. I just ordered Who Wrote the Bible, so it's supposed to come tomorrow.
Oh, good.
That was easy.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's all you need is an index finger
and Amazon, right?
and Amazon. Yeah.
I'm going to try Romans and support a local vendor.
Good for
Okay.
you. They
Thank
probably
you,
know
Jerry.
that.
Thank you, Jerry. Let's keep
So-
let's keep Romans open.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely. The other book I can recommend for the juicy bits that is written for a wider audience is The Harlot by the Side of the Road.
Mm.
I think it's Jonathan Kushner, but I'm.
It would
I
be
think that's
interesting for me to read the Torah and have a discussion from the woman's point of view.
You know, to be honest, I have struggled with the Women's Torah commentary because it's not as critical as I'd like it to be. And I haven't found one that is a true, I haven't found something that's a really feminist critical approach that's like really allowing me to be fully human in my response to the Bible. It is more elevating the any female connection to it and providing some nice poetry inspired by the portions, and really good outlines, obviously, but and historical context, but not a feminist approach per se. So it's an interesting thing because the CCIR has actually published some really nice commentaries on the Bible recently. Which bring you meaning to the text. So recently there's the Musar commentary, which provides you with an ethical section to think about, which is connected to each portion. They just published their social justice commentary, which helps to provide that, which I know is a very important aspect of most Reformed Jews' Judaism. But that adult wrestling with the reality of the text is something that's honestly mostly done in academic work. It's not done on a level that people can understand.
I also think it's important to read it in the quote unquote original and then bring our reactions to it. We don't have to have a guide to tell us how to react to it from our 21st century response. And, that's what makes it so intriguing, is to read it in the original and realize like, oi, this is what we've been, talking about for all these years. It's fascinating. It really is. Tell me about the Talmud and the Mishnah, the Gemara. Tell me how the Talmud fits in with the Torah.
So we as a people were devastated when the Second Temple was destroyed, and not just the destruction of the Second Temple, but the fact that the Romans really decimated the Jewish population of Israel, and sold, if they weren't killed, they were sold into slavery. It's a really fascinating thing for me to reconcile my deeper knowledge of Jewish history with pop culture, particularly because it's not, a lot of the Roman gladiators were Jewish slaves who were forced to fight to the death. And my children's school's mascot is the gladiator. So, so that's one piece of what was happening in the world when the Mishnah and Gemara were happening. Now, really, I could tell you the like rabbinic way of describing it. The rabbis were Jewish philosophers. So just as the Greeks had schools around them and were taught each other orally, and their students gathered in their house, and then their students became part of their school and would teach their wisdom to other people. That's what our rabbis did, and they weren't called rabbis to begin with. So the first people that are mentioned in the Talmud are not referred to by that title, but they were really the Jewish philosophers who were offering an alternative to the corrupt practices that were being continued by people of the priestly line. This priestly, the way that the priests and the elites that became our kings were fighting it out in the Bible, they continue to have just by who they were and who their parents were, have this line of ascent. And so they did have more money than a lot of the other Jews. And a lot of them didn't have a lot. Some of them couldn't even read. It wasn't required that priests be able to read. So they didn't have as much knowledge as these other people that were coming on the scene, who were just like really interested in reading all the time and in helping each other understand and parse out how to do Judaism without a temple. So what do you replace temple sacrifice with? And they came up with the system of prayer and regulations that they claim go back to the Bible, and they will take verses from the Bible and describe it in ways of how to do the Jewish way. Just as in Star Wars, there is the way, that is what halakha means. And so it is just their way of doing Jewish. They never thought of it as like, initially, they didn't think of it as a list of laws. If they did, they would have just written a law book, which would have been as boring to read as the priestly code. But what they did was they had conversations with one another. And the first level of conversations is in the Mishnah. And then the second level is in the Gemara. And together they make up the Talmud. But it's also a fantasy that these conversations happened in the way that they did, because they will have people talking to one another across centuries. So it's the original hyperlinked text.
I mean, I lived in Williamsburg, and I lived right across the street from the Satmar Rabbi, and there was a lot of Hasidim, and I've never understood why they want to live like the 1840s in Russia or whatever, and it is such an anti-feminism movement, and how they don't want to know about the real world. And they don't let the children go to museums, and they don't let the children watch TV, and they don't let the children have radio and all that. I've never understood why. And I grew up, I saw how they lived, and it was so oppressive to women. I mean, and watching and reading some of the books lately, the last couple of years, that have had themes about the Orthodox life, it just confirms what I felt they used to call me Shabbos guy. They knew I was Jewish, but when I would come down on Saturday and throw away the garbage, but yet they would come to me and say, "Can you turn on the light for me?" And finally my mother and my father got really upset. And my father, who was a very passive man, he said, it's more of a sin to ask my daughter to turn on the light than if you turn on the light yourself. And right. He used to shut them up. But nicely, because they like my father. They like my father. But I've never understood the reason for orthodoxy.
So I can attempt to explain a little bit based on how I was taught by my librarian at a conservative synagogue. There is so much to do in life, And by allowing people to have different spheres of influence, you allow people to, excellent. You allow,
it is there.
yeah.
Oh, Jerry found it.
Yeah.
Good job, Jerry.
Okay, I'm going to take it home.
Jerry, don't forget to sign out.
Yeah, make sure you sign it out. 2 weeks. There's a reserve now. Actually, I ordered it
You
online
guys
while
can
we were
keep me
chatting.
honest.
I feel a book club coming on.
Yeah. Okay.
Keep me honest, guys.
So the divisions, there's just too much to do in life, and someone has to be in charge of something and have time for rest. You're not going to have time for rest if everyone is responsible for everything. And so by allowing women to focus their time on taking care of their children, and by nurturing the Jewish home, they were also through most of Jewish history responsible for keeping their home kosher. They knew more about kosher laws than anyone else because they were the ones doing the cooking or overseeing the cooking. That you had a more pleasant shalom bayit, peace in the house. And I have seen this in reading about Jewish women who become more and more religious, and then decide to go into modern Orthodoxy because it allows them to connect more deeply into their understanding of both Jewish community and connection to God. And that if you do believe in halakha, then you accept that by having a prescribed space for yourself, within rules, you have more spiritual freedom. That is the real alignment of modern Orthodoxy. Hasidim is a different thing, and the sects, the modern sects that we have, have become much more fundamentalist. And I would say that part of it is a reaction to the Shoah, the Holocaust, and just wanting to maintain roots of a civilization that was destroyed. But obviously for us, it's not as relevant. The part of it that feels the most relevant is how many people were called goyish for not following that way of living, or whose religious connection to Judaism was questioned. Oh, sure, you're a member of our tribe, but you're not really religious until you follow how we understand halakha.
Right.
And I mean, I even had that feeling myself this past week in a job interview. And I had to accept that, you know what? I'm 43 years old and I am happy with the Judaism that I practice. And if that's not the Judaism that you want in a rabbi, then we're not a good fit. But I can have a respect for how that halakha has guided the elite of Jewish people. I have been the questioning person in every class that I've been in, trying to find out what the actual humans that were alive at any particular point in time were doing. And we don't have a lot of information on that. We do know that Jewish merchants have let slide the laws of Shabbat since the beginning of Jewish people, that the need to travel, sometimes the need to actually buy and sell on Shabbat has always been a part of an understanding of the larger community. It's part of why those merchants helped support the rabbis who were able to follow it. So we supported the people that did the religion that we weren't able to do. And they sat in their libraries and read and discussed the Talmud. They mostly discussed the Talmud. The Bible was only taught to young children. It was seen as so simple that it was not the thing to study if you were a serious scholar of Judaism. It's also why preachers were not rabbis to begin with.
Why didn't the men stay home and take care of the children and let the women study Torah?
What?
No, I'm serious. This is what really offends me.
But you're looking
Yeah.
at it from a 21st century reality. You have to remember, it wasn't until the 1960s, well, maybe the 10s, whatever, that we could control our pregnancies. And women just had babies. And, this changed in our time, but it was a reality of life. And we also have to remember that in Orthodoxy, there's some comfort. I mean, it is like drinking the Kool-Aid, but there's a lot of comfort to it. You know what is asked of you, you know what the rules are, you know what makes you a good person. And, we have to remember that those rules were there for a reason. And we kept the house, the women, they had a lot of work to do. It was not like they were not valued. It's looking at it from our perspective. You have to remember, they kept the houses clean. They kept their children clean. They knew how to, these were kosher laws that kept us from getting sick a lot of times. That's why Jews were separated. They wanted to be separated. There's, you have to look at it from the whole the sociological aspects of it. It was very good to do these things.
I totally agree with Robin. And I want to add to that Jewish women actually had more agency than most of the women around them. So they actually, a lot of times weren't just caring for the household. Many, not all, but many more Jewish families had servants to do that work of preparing food and taking care of the children. And women were the people that were minding the store while their men went and studied. So that's one thing. The other thing is that we don't fully understand how Jews related to their sexuality throughout Jewish history. We do know, you can see this in any Orthodox Chumash, that Jewish understanding of the crime of adultery was a man staying at another woman's house the entire night. It was not the act of sex itself. So and we also didn't blame women for the fall of humanity. The sin, the idea of Eve being the cause of humans not being in the Garden of Eden is not. It's not the way that Jews have framed their understanding of that story. So from these two things, many of the earliest consorts to princes in Europe were female, because we had a much more natural connection to our body. And that was a source of political power for the Jews in the lands, and caused this tension and would cause periodic waves of challenges to us. But so there were many ways that women were engaged because they were Jewish women, that was not available to other women of their time frames. It's frustrating from the 21st century frame. But it is exciting to know that even though they aren't who wrote all the books that are in my Jewish library before the 20th century, they were still there.
So like things like, what was it, Salome, who with Samson, right? She was the one that got him to cut his hair or whatever. So
Delilah.
Delilah, thank you. And so, women have played these parts down through history in that. So I can see that. They were not just little wallflowers sitting in the back.
Yeah.
And the fact that they were the ones responsible for teaching the religion to the children, that's a big deal.
So what did the men do?
They were either working or talking as a group about what was going on with the Bible with the
idea. It's a bit of a pious history to say that women were teaching their kids, because every Jewish community would hire a man to run a cheder, a place to for their children to go and study, their boys to go and study. But women were responsible for ensuring that holiday celebrations happened at their home.
Okay.
And so,
But girls were not allowed to study.
well, Rashi's daughters all studied.
Right. But I'm just saying in general.
You know what? They were not given like the access to cheder, but they were taught, but they did, how should I say it? They did have some things that they had to learn. They had to learn the prayers. They had to learn how to do Shabbos. They had to learn how, and a lot of them had their own literature that they read, which was like women's literature. Most of it was in Yiddish, and they had their own books and they had their own little prayer, their sidurim. So they were not kept from learning necessarily. Like in some cultures, they were not forbidden to learn. But you have to remember, no women at that time were given the ability to do that.
Yeah.
You know,
That's
you have to
true.
look at the time and how, you know, we have to look at it from their perspective. But we had to raise children who could read, right? 98% of the boys read, and
Mhm.
that meant that the women had to respect it and had to make sure that their children were learning. So that was one of the biggest things in Judaism, is how we were able to survive, was because 98% of the boys could read. So wherever they went, we had to set up houses of learning, houses of study, and that's why we're so smart, because we had to read the Torah.
You know what? At
That's why
one
we have
point,
Nobel Prizes.
right, at one point in my career, I worked for Dentsu Advertising, and my bosses in the LA office were Japanese from Tokyo, and it was really fascinating. And I wish I could find it, but they gave me a book called The Japanese and the Jews, and he said to me, the similarities far outweigh the differences in the cultures.
Wow.
Like that, about how we respected the elderly, how we education. It was very, very interesting.
And how they treated their women so poorly? No, the same, right? They
Well,
treated
no.
their women
Well, no,
like
well,
we
well,
treated our
but
women.
I think they were talking culture more than specifics, but it
Right.
was you know, like I'll leave you with this. He gave me a review of Fiddler on the Roof from the Tokyo Times.
Mhm.
And the critic said how wonderful it was. Says, we don't understand why this is Caucasian when it exemplifies Oriental values so much.
Because it's a universal theme.
Right. Well, but they really saw a connection more so than other cultures. They really, really did. It's a fascinating book called The Japanese and the Jews.
You know, it's the same as my husband was very anxious about introducing me to his parents. He was worried that they wouldn't accept me because I'm not Chinese. And when they met me, they were happy that I was they saw me as a traditional girl. They recognized that a person who is connected to values is the same across cultures and is not what is elevated in the general culture of America. So I do appreciate that. I think it's the same. It's when you recognize the importance of family and of community, and then of being a good person within your family, within your community, and in yourself, those are universal qualities for all of our civilizations.
Yeah, but if you've never lived with the Orthodox culture in the community, it's absolutely fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating to see the differences in in it. And this was in the 1950s when I was growing up, and I just couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe it.
But it's fascinating to me that now in 2022, people aspire towards it, and there is such a resurgent or a growth of Chabad communities because the way that we've understood Judaism has seen that as the true religion, that we're just filtering it.
I'm sorry, Chabad is modern Orthodoxy?
It's a Hasidic sect. It is
I
it is Chassidim.
I don't think I ever realized it.
Yeah.
Chabad, Chabad is the Lubavitchers, the Lubavitch.
Oh, it's Lubavitch.
Yeah.
Oh.
And what's interesting about them is that they've got 1 foot in the 19th century and 1 foot in the 21st century.
Right.
All of their technology is top notch and first rate.
Oh yeah, their marketing.
100%
Yeah,
21st century.
Their telethon, and all that.
And even their messaging, they do say we meet you where you are, and we're not judgmental, but they are, and they like, getting the guys to do the, to
Wrap to fill in, yeah.
leg feeling.
Yeah.
Well,
So my goal is to use their example to rejuvenate progressive Judaism, that we need to be as open as they are to people who are not members, and still stay rooted in how we understand Judaism, and really recognize that it is an important thing. For us, we are more able to say, not just for ourselves, but for our non-Jewish loved ones and for anyone who is seeking meaning. And it really inspires me that people do want meaning in their lives, and that we can offer it through a progressive Jewish model.
Yep. Well, Rab, I would have loved to have learned all this. My grandfather on my dad's side was a Orthodox rabbi. Okay, but he passed when I was only 2 years old, because he was born back there in the 1800s, so, by the time I was born, he was already up there in age. But now I heard he was a very smart man, could speak 5 different languages, and really had, he out there on the west side, he had a couple out there, and he would stuff, and I would have loved to learn it. So, yeah. The other thing I wanted to ask, a friend of mine that's not Jewish gave me a book a while back. I haven't read it yet. For the holidays, I don't know if you ever heard of it. It's called the Jewish Voice Bible.
The Jewish Voice Bible?
Yeah, the Tree of Life version.
Huh. I have not.
Yeah. I have to look through it and see who actually wrote it.
Oh, Reb Minster, even though I have less background, and this was fascinating. Thank you.
My pleasure.
Yeah, really, this was fascinating. I think we need more of this.
Well, we're gonna have 4 more. So
yeah, I never thought I would want a Torah study, but now I'm thinking, it'd be interesting.
That's wonderful. I did do just a quick Google search, Wayne, and just to warn you, it does look like it is a messianic text that you were given. So that means a Christian friend who is trying to explain to you how Judaism is really fulfilled by a belief in Jesus.
Oh, New York used to have on every street corner Jews for Jesus, and I would walk by and go, I don't think so.
They were very active in the 70s.
All right. So Reb Minster, is the next one the 26th or March? Because I saw 2 different flyers.
The next one is 26th. Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. And then instead of having a week in between, it'll be the 26th and then March 6th, because March 13th, everyone's gathering to make Hamantashen.
Thank
Right.
you.
So we're going to have 2 weeks in a row.
Yes.
Okay.
Reb Minster, can you suggest something to read in advance of the next session?
I'll have to think about that.
You can
It would probably be a section from Sepharia, And I might find an introductory like chapter or something from Steinsaltz, maybe. I do think that he writes in a way that is accessible. But I will definitely,
If
I
you
will
do,
get back
can
to you. too.
Thank you.
you maybe email it out to the participants?
Yeah.
Yes.
Or put it on the flyer.
Okay.
Oh, that's
Right.
good. Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah.
send us an email that it's there, but that way anybody who sees the flyer will
Right.
have access.
Right.
Right.
So thank you to Reb Minster, Shari, and Robin for helping me not feel so lame.
You're learning. That's the
I
main
am.
thing.
That's
Yeah.
right.
If we knew it all, we wouldn't be here.
I would have thought at my 70s, I'm still learning.
Hey, it's your
Right.
Alzheimer's prevention program.
That's your
I
job.
know, right? What?
That's your job.
That's what we,
Yeah.
that's part of our religion is as
That's
Jews,
part of
we
my-
are,
It's
we are,
it's-
part of my job.
we are constant learners.
Right.
Thank you, Reb Minster, for bringing this to our temple. And
Yeah.
I think the beauty of this is we are all in different stages of our knowledge. And with your help, it's made it more accessible to all of us.
Absolutely.
So glad to hear that, Rona.
Thank you from the bottom of my heart, honestly.
Thank you, thank you. And Rona, that was beautifully said.
Oh,
Yeah.
thank you.
Thank you very much.
Somebody earlier put down the website that we can go on to for last week's.
Right?
Yeah, YouTube.
Can we
Yeah.
have it more accessible since once we leave Zoom, it'll be gone?
Yeah,
No,
it
it's on
won't be.
YouTube.
They are on YouTube. Let me copy that link for you again for the last class. It's in the, oh, that is not,
I had to leave in the middle of it, so I
Yeah.
feel like I wanted to start it again.
Yeah. But if you don't get the link, just Google Temple Beth David YouTube, and then just scroll down.
Okay.
You'll see a Bissel of Judaism, and you'll see Reb
Okay.
Minster's face, and
Thank you.
just click.
yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Shabbat shalom, everybody.
Shabbat
Shalom.
Thank you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.